Creche cubs were born to growl. That was the first lesson every single one of them learned. Snarl, howl, show your teeth early and often. It was the foundation of their entire species. They communicated through sheer volume, through aggression, and through a rumbling resonance that could literally rattle metal plates. Subtlety was a trait for prey. Quiet was a sign of the dead. So, when the creche nursery attendants first heard it, they immediately assumed the sound system was malfunctioning. They heard a soft, barely audible noise, like a faint static, but the system was fine. The sound was coming from the cubs themselves. They would huddle together in a small, furry pile, tiny claws gripping each other's fur, and make a sound so quiet it was barely even air, a soft, drawn-out pee-pee hup. And worse, so much worse from the creche perspective, they only whispered to her the human. Private Lena Carter had been assigned to creche cultural exchange duty. Now anyone in the military knew what that really meant. It was code for, you survived something absolutely horrible, and we have no idea where else to put you right now. Lena didn't complain. Not after the ambush on Vesk Ridge, not after losing her entire squad. Quiet duty sounded just fine. But she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected them. At first, the creche staff kept a wide berth between her and the cubs. Humans were soft-skinned, fragile-limbed creatures. They smelled of strange flowers and antiseptic scents that were both confusing and deeply intriguing to young predators. Some of the elders worried that the cubs' instincts would kick in, that they might see her as prey and attack. But the opposite happened. The cubs started following her. They would waddle after her on their oversized paws, their teeth barely grown in, their tails wagging with a dangerous lack of coordination. They would sit patiently by her boots. They would tug gently at her pant leg, and then they started to whisper. One afternoon, elder trainer Varish, his face a mask of grim confusion, finally confronted her. "They do not whisper," he insisted, his own voice a low, rumbling growl. "Creche do not lower their voices. It is not done. You have taught them some human ritual." Lena just blinked, her expression placid. "Sir, with all due respect, the only thing I teach them is how to put the blocks back on the shelf without chewing them into splinters." He stared at her. Then he stared at the cluster of cubs at her feet. Then his gaze snapped back to her. Just then, one of the cubs, a tiny one with big eyes and stripy fur named Reek, climbed clumsily into her lap. He leaned his head against her chest and with a contented sigh, whispered a soft putable, shh. The elder nearly fell over. "This is unnatural," Varish hissed, his voice tight with alarm. "Whispering is secret language behavior. It is used only before hunts, only before kills. Why do they whisper to you? Lena had absolutely no idea. She just instinctively rubbed Reek's ears, and he hummed happily, a tiny motor in her lap. The first real clue came about 3 cycles later. Lena entered the nursery and found the cubs clustered around a nest of blankets. As one, they turned their heads toward her in perfect, unnerving unison, more coordination than they had ever shown before, and then they whispered, all of them. PWHHA, Sha, Lena, safe. She froze solid. Not just because the whispering was eerie, which it was, and not because a pack of young predators moving in complete silence went against their very nature, which it did. She froze because she recognized the pattern. It sounded just like the breathing exercises her squad medic used to teach them. A soft inhale, a slow exhale. Words woven gently between each breath. The cubs had been watching her. They had seen her practicing those calming drills, the ones she used when the nightmares from Vesk Ridge clawed at her throat in the dead of night. The ones she thought she'd been doing privately, hidden away in a corner when no one was looking. But the cubs had noticed, and they had copied her. You're trying to help me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. In response, the cubs nuzzled into her legs and arms. Reek climbed into her lap again. Safe, he whispered, pressing his head against her. Her throat tightened, and for the first time in months, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with survival. Of course, it didn't stay a secret for long. The phenomenon of whispering predator cubs was unprecedented. Scientists, elders, warriors, and panicked cultural officials crowded the nursery windows every single day. Some were cautious, some were horrified. A few, The more opportunistic ones saw a potential weapon. The cubs didn't care about any of them. They only whispered when Lena was in the room. Never to anyone else. The creche elders debated endlessly. They are mimicking a human calming technique, one would argue. No, it is clearly a bonding ritual, another would counter. You are all fools. It is pre-hunt behavior. A third would roar. Then why do they whisper words of comfort? The first would ask, and the argument would circle back to the beginning. No one could explain it, no one except Lena. She knew. They whispered because they had chosen her. Because in the quiet moments, they had sensed the tremor in her breath. They had felt the deep sadness she tried so hard to hide. They had recognized the old pain she carried like an invisible, heavy scar. Predators are experts at recognizing weakness in prey. But these cubs, they recognized it in someone they loved. The true breakthrough came during the great storm. The fierce winds cracked open half of the nursery dome, and lightning strikes shook the entire structure to its foundation. The cubs panicked. Creche young were born fierce, but storms triggered a deep ancestral terror in their blood. The elders tried to calm them with traditional roars of reassurance, projecting strength and dominance. But it didn't work. It only made the chaos worse. Then, Lena stepped through the shattered doorway. Instantly, the cubs stopped trembling. They ran to her, crowding into her arms and clinging to her legs, letting her guide them into a tight, furry circle in the center of the room. She took a slow, deep breath. The cubs inhaled with her. She exhaled softly. They exhaled with her. And together, they whispered. Soft, steady, unbroken, and for the first time in all recorded creche history, a violent storm did not send their young into a frenzy of fear. They stayed calm. They felt safe. They were alive. Afterward, when the storm had passed, elder trainer Varish approached her again. His usual booming voice was gone, replaced by a quiet, humbled tone. We do not understand, he admitted, shaking his massive head. Why do they whisper to you, and you alone? Lena looked down at the cubs curled up in her lap, still whispering like tiny, contented breaths against her. Because sometimes, she said softly, looking up at him, the loudest creatures in the universe need someone who knows how to be quiet. The elder blinked, the concept so alien to him. And you taught them, Lena finished, gently brushing Reek's fur. That strength doesn't always have to roar. Behind her, the cubs whispered again, a sound that was soft, gentle, and impossibly tender. No one ever learned the exact words they spoke to her in their secret language. But the galaxy learned one profound lesson that day. Predator cubs whisper only to those they trust with their whole hearts. And the very first creature they ever trusted that way was a quiet, broken human soldier. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more. We'll see you in the next one. Word traveled fast across the creche territories. Within a single cycle, the story had spread far beyond the nursery. The cubs whisper. And only when the human is present. Some dismissed it as an exaggeration. Some feared it was a sign of human manipulation. And some, especially the old warriors, called it a myth meant to soften the reputation of predators. But myths don't leave claw marks, and these cubs did. Not from aggression, no. It was from something far stranger. From trying to write. Lena arrived one morning to find scratch marks carved into the padded floor tiles. They weren't random. They looked almost deliberate. There were shapes in clusters, lines stacked like attempts at symbols. The cubs ran to her, chuffing with excitement instead of whispering. Reek, the bravest of them, pressed both his paws on the scratches. This? Lena asked, crouching down. You made this? A dozen tiny heads bobbed in unison. She examined the marks again. It looked like letters. Clumsy, backward, uneven, but recognizably her own alphabet. Oh no, she muttered to herself. They're trying to spell. Varish stormed in just moments later, his fur bristling with alarm. The cubs have begun making shapes. Something is wrong, Lena coughed nervously. Sir, they're trying to write my name. Varish stared at the scratch marks on the floor. These are symbols from the human tongue? Yeah, and the cubs made them? Looks like it. The elder creche warrior sat down so abruptly that several staff members flinched. His tail drooped heavily against the floor. Creche do not write before adolescence, he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Their claws are too clumsy. Their minds too wild. Lena looked over at the cubs, who were proudly showing her the mess of symbols they'd created. These ones aren't. The cubs all leaned in together, pressing their shoulders against her legs in their version of a group hug. Then, in perfect unison, they inhaled and whispered, "Lena. Lena, safe." Varish shuddered, a ripple running through his massive frame. They whisper your name because they view you as comfort. Lena placed her hand on Reek's head, feeling the soft fur beneath her palm. I don't think that's all, because something in the way they whispered sounded more like a plea, a request, a message. That night, the staff allowed her to stay after hours to observe them. She sat cross-legged on the nursery floor while the cubs curled around her like a furry circle of tiny purring predators. She spoke softly, not really expecting any answers. You little ones are learning way too fast. Writing? Whispering? What are you trying to tell me? Reek crawled onto her lap again. His eyes glowed in the dimness predator eyes, ancient and instinctive. He placed a small, sharp-clawed paw on her chest, right where her heart lay. Then he whispered, his breath warm against her shirt. Hear us. Lena froze. Hear you? I hear you whisper all the time. The cub shook his head slowly. He whispered again, more urgently this time. Hear us outside. A chill crawled down her spine. Outside, what? The cubs all pressed in tighter, their collective warmth doing little to stop the cold fear creeping into her. Their fur spiked, not in aggression, but in worry. Predator Young didn't fear the dark, but they smelled something that she couldn't. One by one, they whispered the same word, a chorus of tiny, urgent voices. Outside, outside, outside. Then a new word, danger. Lena's blood went cold. 10 minutes later, alarms blared across the entire habitat. A pack of rogue Kresh outcasts twisted by old wars and old grudges had breached the perimeter. These were predators with no tribe, no honor, living only by violence. They were here for the cubs, and for humans. The staff hurried to evacuate, but the cubs refused to leave Lena. They clung to her clothing with their tiny claws, their small bodies trembling. Varish ran back into the nursery, panting heavily. Human, you must retreat to the inner shelter. I'm not leaving the cubs, Lena said, her voice firm. He bared his fangs in frustration. They will not move without you, but if the rogues sent you, a distant roar split the air. It was deep, hungry. The sound vibrated through the floor. The cubs trembled violently. Lena knelt down, forcing them to look at her. Hey, look at me. Dozens of terrified yellow eyes lifted to meet hers. We're going to stay calm. Just like during the storm. Breathe with me. The cubs inhaled shakily. She inhaled with them. They exhaled. She exhaled. And then the whispering started again. Soft. Rhythmic. Unbroken. Varish watched in stunned disbelief as the cubs shifted from pure panic to a steady focus, something no Kresh child had ever done in the face of a direct threat. Lena stood, the cubs gathered behind her legs, a united front. We move together, she said, her voice steady. Varish nodded, shaken by how naturally she led them. Outside, the rogue pack roared again, closer this time. And the cubs whispered back, their voices a single, unified wave of sound. Safe with Lena. The Kresh elder's eyes widened. Predators whispered only before hunts, only before defending what they loved. As Lena stepped toward the shelter with the cubs clustered tightly around her legs, she realized something profound. They weren't whispering to her anymore. They were whispering for her, for protection, for courage, for unity. Whatever waited for them outside, the cubs had chosen her, not just as their comfort, but as their defender. Predator cubs didn't make mistakes when choosing their pack. And they had whispered her name for a reason. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one. The chamber door bulged inward as the rogue alpha rammed it again. Metal shrieked, bending like softened clay, and dust rained down from the shaking ceiling. The cubs, terrified, pressed into Lena's legs, their little bodies trembling. They whispered in rapid, breathy pulses, fight, fight. With Lena, she didn't feel brave. She felt absolutely terrified. But she crouched anyway, forcing her breath steady, making her voice a calm anchor in the chaos. Cubs, listen to me. You stay behind me. No matter what, Varesh, the elder Kresh, glared at her. His fur bristled with a mix of fear and disbelief. Human, you cannot fight an alpha. Even one who has fallen feral. Then buy time, she said, her voice tight. Do what you elders do best, roar. He blinked, confusion warring with the immediate danger. Roar? She gave him a desperate, almost manic grin. You're loud. Use it. Another deafening crash. This time, a hinge snapped clean off. The alpha was coming through. Lena forced herself to stand tall. She was unarmed, her eyes darting around the room for anything at all. Her gaze landed on a training spear mounted on the wall. She ripped it free. It was lightweight, flimsy, meant for adolescent drills, not a fight to the death. But it was something. It was a line drawn in the sand. Behind her, the cubs whispered again, their tiny voices weaving together, low, rhythmic, falling into a strange sync with her own racing heartbeat. Shh, Padabosh, with you, the door didn't just open. It exploded inward. The rogue alpha burst through in a terrifying wave of fur, muscle, and pure hate. He was taller than any Kresh she'd ever seen, a monster of scarred flesh and cold metal. Red mechanical eyes gleamed like twin furnaces, scanning the room and locking onto them. He let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the building, a sound of pure, unrestrained violence. Varesh, startled into action, roared back. His voice was powerful, but it cracked under the sheer weight of his fear. For a heart-stopping moment, the cubs fell silent, holding their breath, their wide eyes fixed on the unfolding nightmare. Then Lena exhaled, and whispered a single, firm word. Stay. The cubs obeyed instantly, huddling together behind her. The alpha lunged. The impact she braced for was a tidal wave of fury. Lena dove sideways, scraping the flimsy spear along the alpha's flank. Sparks flew as it glanced off his hide. He was augmented, a horrifying hybrid of metal and flesh. And they whispered her name, Lena. Lena, the sound cut through her fear. It focused her, sharpened her senses. She slid under the alpha's second swipe, a clawed hand that could have torn her in half, rolled to her feet, and jabbed upward with the spear. It clanged uselessly off metal-plated ribs. The alpha snarled, a guttural sound of annoyance, and grabbed the spear shaft, snapping it in two like a twig. Seeing a flicker of an opening, Varesh leapt onto the alpha's back, his own claws sinking deep into muscle and fur. But the augmented beast threw him off effortlessly. Varesh slammed into the far wall with a sickening thud and crumpled to the ground. The cubs cried out tiny horrified squeaks of despair. The alpha's red eyes tracked the sound, sensing their vulnerability. He turned his attention from the downed elder and the human and lunged for the cubs. Lena didn't think. She just moved. Pure primal instinct took over. The alpha's claws slashed across her shoulder. Fire, white-hot and blinding, shot through her nerves. She staggered from the blow, her vision blurring, but she stayed upright. She would not fall. The cubs screamed. And then their screams morphed into a whisper, so powerful it seemed to press in on the very air in the room, an almost physical force. No hurt, Lena. No hurt. No hurt. The alpha recoiled. Not physically, but mentally. He flinched, his head twitching as if confused by their synchronized chant. Kresh didn't whisper this way, ever. It was an anomaly, a glitch in his predator programming. Lena grit her teeth, tasting blood. That's right, she hissed, forcing the words out through the pain. Look at them, you see them calling me Pack? The alpha just snarled, shaking his head as if to clear it. You can't have them. He lunged again, a final, decisive attack. This time Lena didn't dodge. She stepped into the attack. At the last possible second, as his claws reached for her, she grabbed the broken half of the spear still clutched in his own hand and with all her strength jammed the jagged end into the small gap between his mechanical neck plating and his shoulder. The alpha roared, a sound of pure agony this time, not rage. The alpha dropped to one knee, his massive body shaking violently. And then the cubs raised their voices again. Not in a scream, not in a shout, but in that eerie, powerful whisper unison. Sleep, sleep. The alpha swayed. His fear, augmented instincts battled against the strange, gentle command. The whispering clawed at something primal within him, something older than war, older than technology. Something about the sound of young voices calling for peace. With one final convulsive shudder, the rogue alpha collapsed, unconscious. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Lena stood panting, blood soaking her shoulder, the adrenaline starting to fade, leaving only the throbbing pain. Varish stared at her, his expression one of complete awe, as though she had just performed a miracle. Then the silence was broken. The cubs rushed to her, swarming her legs, her arms, her chest, burying their faces in her clothes and whispering frantically, "Safe, Lena, Lena, safe, strong, strong." She knelt among them, her own body trembling. "Hey, easy. I'm okay. I'm okay." Varish approached slowly, his voice hushed with reverence. "Human, I owe you an apology." "And the truth." Lena looked up, confused, cradling a cub to her chest. "The cubs whisper because they have chosen you," he explained. "Not merely as comfort. Not just as pack." He swallowed, the next words seeming to cost him a great deal. "They whisper because you fill a place in their instincts that our kind has long since lost." "What place?" she asked softly. "The role of a guide," he said, his voice barely above a whisper itself. "One who teaches strength beyond teeth and claws. One who leads without a roar." The cubs pressed their small heads against her chest, their whispers changing, becoming something new. A new phrase, repeated with a gentle certainty. "Lena. Heart, elder." Varish bowed his head, a gesture of immense respect. "You are their heart elder now." Lena swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. She had no idea what that truly meant. But as she looked down at the small, trusting faces looking up at her, she knew one thing for sure. The cubs did. And they whispered it like a sacred promise. Thanks for tuning in to this story. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what you think it means to be a heart elder. We'll see you in the next one.